From the Pep Radio Newsroom, these are the stories we are following at this hour. The Ohio Senate and House have now both passed a bill that would forcibly out LGBTQ plus students to their parents and allow parents to opt their child out of sexuality content at school. House Bill 8 defines sexuality content as any oral or written instruction, presentation, image, or description of sexual concepts or gender ideology provided in a classroom setting, with exceptions granted for STI and abuse discussion, as well as incidental references to sexual concepts or gender ideology. There's a total ban on sexuality content in grades 3 and below, with all other grades facing a requirement for parental review of the content. It additionally requires notification of any substantial change in student services, defined as including changes to one's gender identity in the school system. The bill was introduced by State Representatives DJ Swearingen and Sarah Carruthers, both Republicans. If people are out and they don't have supportive parents, there's an epidemic of LGBTQ youth homelessness, Dara Atkinson, an activist with Trans Ohio, told News 5 Cleveland. There are parents who don't affirm their children and then decide that they would like them to not be their children. For students that have queer families, it is then not okay in early childhood curriculum to discuss queer families as part of the community, they added. Carruthers claims, however, that there is no hidden agenda and that this is about advocating for parental rights. She claims it is not anti-LGBTQ and that nothing can be done these days without offending others. I'm sorry, Sarah Carruthers, but that is total bullshit, and you should know better. Well, now you do. The bill is now on its way to the desk of Republican Governor Mike DeWine as advocacy groups call for him to veto it. We are deeply disappointed that the legislature decided once again to attack LGBTQIA plus youth by passing yet another bill that will make schools less safe and inclusive for queer and transgender people, said a statement from Kaleidoscope Youth Center and LGBTQ plus Youth Center. Equality Ohio Executive Director Dwayne Stewart added, "Overnight, when most school-age children are asleep, the legislature rushed through another shameful attack on LGBTQ plus youth. Our advice to parents is get out of Ohio as quickly as you can. May we suggest more welcoming states like Michigan or Pennsylvania? At least in these two states, your kids will not be forced out of the closet simply for attending school." And now this heart and hand-warming story. Knit the Rainbow, a nonprofit dedicated to providing colorful handmade knitwear to unhoused LGBTQ plus youth, is in high gear this holiday season as temperatures drop and their clientele seeks shelter from the cold. The group was formed by New Yorker Austin Rivers after he discovered his passion for knitting during the pandemic. "I don't have the capacity to build a shelter, the network, or the connections to help in that way, but what I can do is knit," Rivers told NBC News. "And I know that New York City is cold, so I decided I would start knitting and create this nonprofit." The group's focus is on LGBTQ plus youth, which make up 40% of New York's unhoused youth population. A lot of the times, the reason they're unhoused is because they were kicked out by their families, so we're not just providing warmth, we're also providing that love and compassion that they so often do not have. Rivers has recruited 550 knitters across the country to his cause. Volunteers from 45 states and 3 countries are mailing donations from across the United States to my apartment here in New York. We have local volunteers here in New York that come to my apartment and unbox donations, sort them, inventory them, and tag them. The group has given away over 25,000 colorful knitted garments like hats, gloves, scarves, and sweaters, Rivers shared. Volunteer teams in New Jersey, Chicago, and Detroit are distributing garments to local nonprofits in those areas as well. Don't be surprised if Ohio eventually gets added to the list. And finally, this news from Chicago. In response to continued attacks on trans women, particularly Black trans women in the city, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson issued an executive order on Tuesday establishing a Transfemicide Working Group to develop comprehensive strategies addressing violence against transgender women in our city. Under the requirements of the order, the city's Commission on Human Relations will collaborate with the Chicago Police Department to form the working group by the end of next February. It will include representation from departments across the city who will review and recommend city policies, procedures, and training and directives to change outcomes within the BIPOC, transgender, and gender diverse community. In establishing the working group, Johnson acknowledges that Chicago has become the deadliest city in the nation for Black trans women. In one of the most recent cases, Red, a 25-year-old who also went by the name Barbie, was shot and killed last September. Another trans woman was critically injured in the same shooting. Chicago has one of the worst records for solving murder of trans women. The Chicago Sun-Times reported in July that while the national average for clearing the murder of trans women is 50%, it is just 14% in Chicago. There's no follow-up, trans activist Sahara Bassett told the paper. I know a few people who've been murdered, and no one knows what happened still to this day. Chicago police have been repeatedly accused of misgendering murder victims. Trans advocacy groups in Chicago have been pushing for legislation that would require the police to collect data tracking crimes against trans people. For more information about this story or any of the stories we cover, check out the PEP radio page on the Pennsylvania Equality Project website, paequality.com. Be sure to download the Live 365 app to take PEP Radio with you wherever you go. That's the news at this hour, and now back to more music here on PEP Radio.